Have you ever made a decision that felt totally right, but later you thought, wait, why did I even do that? Maybe you bought something just because it was on sale, or maybe you stuck with a bad idea just because you already invested time into it. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not weird. You're human, and that's exactly what this video is about. Your brain takes mental shortcuts, it skips logic, it leads you to do things that feel smart but actually aren't. They're called cognitive biases, and they mess with your thinking every single day. Let's break down 5 of the most common ones and how they secretly influence your choices. Let's start with a bias that almost everyone has experienced, whether we realize it or not: confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is your brain's tendency to look for, remember, and believe information that supports what you already think, while ignoring or downplaying anything that challenges it. For example, imagine someone who loves drinking soda every day. Deep down, they know it's probably not healthy, but they search for articles that say, "Some studies show moderate soda intake has no serious harm." They latch on to those headlines and skip the overwhelming research about sugar and health risks. It feels comforting to see proof that their habit isn't so bad. That's confirmation bias in action. Your brain wants to feel right, not necessarily be right. This bias shows up everywhere: politics, health, finance, and even in how we view the people around us. What makes it so dangerous is how natural it feels. You don't think you're filtering out truth. It just feels like reality agrees with you. But if we only seek information that supports what we already believe, we stop learning. We trap ourselves in echo chambers and miss chances to grow. How can we challenge this? By paying close attention to our reactions when we encounter uncomfortable truths. Do we instantly reject them, or take a moment to ask, what if I'm wrong? Growth starts when we let in what we'd rather ignore. Let's move on to another bias that quietly influences how we judge value, especially when money is involved: anchoring bias. Anchoring happens when your brain clings to the first number or idea it sees, and uses it as a reference point for everything that comes after, even if it's totally unrelated. Imagine you're browsing online for sneakers. The first pair you see is $220, way out of your budget. Then you spot another for $150. It suddenly feels like a good deal, even though $150 is still a lot. That $220 price anchored your thinking. The anchor becomes the lens through which we judge everything. That's why it's so powerful and so invisible. To avoid falling into this trap, slow down and ask, would I feel the same way if I hadn't seen that first number? Remember, anchors don't just hold ships in place. They can drag your thinking in the wrong direction too. Let's keep going. The next bias messes with how we perceive probability and danger: availability bias. Availability bias is when your brain assumes something is more common or more likely to happen simply because it's easier to recall. In other words, if something is fresh in your memory or emotionally intense, your brain treats it as more important, even if it's rare. Let's say you just saw a news report about a plane crash. Suddenly, flying feels terrifying, even though statistically, it's still one of the safest ways to travel. Your brain doesn't care about the numbers. It just remembers the scary image. This bias is why people often overestimate the danger of shark attacks, lightning strikes, or terrorist incidents, and underestimate more common risks like heart disease or distracted driving. It's not what's actually likely that shapes our fears. It's what's vivid and memorable. Marketers and media know this. That's why headlines often highlight dramatic or unusual events. The more emotionally charged something is, the easier it sticks, and the more it influences your decisions. To fight this bias, ask yourself, is this fear based on facts, or just on what I happen to hear or see recently? All right, let's look at a bias that might sound funny, but affects us all at some point: the Kruger Effect. This is when people with low ability or knowledge in a subject overestimate how much they actually know. It's not about arrogance, it's about not knowing what you don't know. Here's a simple example. Imagine someone reads a few articles about dieting and suddenly thinks they can coach others on nutrition, even though they've never studied health science or worked with real clients. Or someone watches a few videos about investing and now believes they understand the entire stock market. At the early stages of learning, confidence is often highest because people don't yet realize how much more there is to learn. Researchers Dunning and Kruger found that beginners tend to have inflated confidence, while experts, who know how complex things really are, tend to doubt themselves more. This bias shows up everywhere, in the workplace, in politics, in online arguments. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the most informed, just the most unaware of their limitations. To avoid this trap, stay humble. When you're learning something new, remind yourself, confidence doesn't always mean competence. Seek feedback, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to admit what you don't know. That's how real expertise begins. For our final bias, let's talk about something that feels positive, but can quietly lead us into risky decisions: optimism bias. Optimism bias is our tendency to believe that negative things are less likely to happen to us than to others. We often think we're the exception to the rule, that accidents, illnesses, or failures are things that happen to other people. Think about texting while driving. Many people know it's dangerous, but still do it, believing, "I'll be careful, it won't happen to me." Or skipping health checkups because, "I feel fine." Or taking on debt, assuming that somehow it'll work out. This bias can be comforting. It gives us hope. But it can also blind us to real risks, making us less cautious and more prone to poor planning. Optimism bias also shows up in business. Entrepreneurs often underestimate how long a project will take, how much it'll cost, or how hard it is to succeed, not because they're lazy, but because they truly believe things will just work out. To balance this bias, ask yourself, am I making this decision based on facts, or just on a hopeful feeling? So there you have it, 5 cognitive biases that quietly influence the way we think, judge, and decide. The truth is, no one is immune to bias. These mental shortcuts are part of being human. But the more aware we are, the better choices we can make, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. If you found this video helpful, give it a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content every week. And let us know in the comments which of these biases surprised you the most.